The following presentation is made possible by the generous support of the Rockport Hotel in Gloucester, Massachusetts.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the first in the Rockport Art Association and Museum's 2024 series of artist demonstrations. We're really glad you all could come out tonight. Before we start, we'd also like to acknowledge and thank the Rockport Hotel in Gloucester for generously hosting some of the artists in our 2024 series. Yay, It's my great privilege to introduce tonight's featured artist, Demers, and his painting demonstration entitled The Moving Sea. Don is considered one of the finest marine and landscape painters in America. The exemplary level of Don's paintings has placed them in some of the most prestigious public and private collections in the country. Don Demers is also a highly sought-after instructor, and his teaching has taken him around the United States and Europe. His work as an illustrator has been honored 4 times in the annual exhibition of the Society of Illustrators. Don's marine paintings have garnered him a record 21 awards at the Mystic International Marine Exhibition, including the prestigious Rudolph J. Schaefer Award. He has received awards for his landscape painting from the Joan Irving Museum in Irving, California, the Laguna Plein Air Invitational, and from the Guild of Boston Artists. Don is a fellow of the American Society of Marine Artists, a signature member of the Plein Air Painters of America, an elected member of the Salmagundi Club, an elected member of the California Art Club, and a juried artist member of the Rockport Art Association and Museum. So, welcome, Don.
Thank you, Kristen. Thanks, everybody, for being here. It's an honor. It's wonderful to see folks that are old friend. Oh, you can't say old friend anymore. Once you get to a certain age, longtime friend. I've got some longtime friends and some new friends and acquaintances, and I really, really appreciate the time and the attention, the effort that you've taken to come and share some time with me to watch me work and listen to my words. I'm very, very grateful for that. It means a great deal to me. Most of our time as painters and or sculptors, anybody in the visual arts or other art forms, most of our time is spent alone. So it's really gratifying, and it's an honor, and I hope I don't blow it. It's a much bigger crowd than we had anticipated. Now I know how Taylor Swift feels. So I want this to be casual to some degree. If you're uncomfortable in your seat, feel free to shift around, move a little bit, because it is a little congested, and I want you to be able to see, and don't be shy about saying, will you move out of the way so I can see what you're doing. And photography and all that stuff, it's fine. Anything that, believe it or not, this is an educational experience. So I want you to be comfortable. If the demo doesn't come out well, the food's terrific. For any of you that maybe are a little bit claustrophobic or get a little bit anxious, or you find this demo to be unbearably tedious, we have exits. But please, if you do get up and leave, just consider your neighbor. They may be asleep. One more thing, and then we'll just start into painting, because this is a truncated format, so I want to keep moving. But I would be remiss extremely if I didn't thank the Rockport Art Association and its staff, Kristen, Margaret, all the other staff members, all of the volunteers that work so hard to maintain what is an incredibly established art icon in America. Cape Ann clearly is one of the most defined, if not the most defined, art colony in America. And this organization, it's the oldest art association in the country, starting in 1921. So not only am I standing on hallowed ground with the spirit and the inspiration of all of these brilliant painters and sculptors that were here before, the audience is also littered with a lot of extremely accomplished painters. And when I look around and I feel where I am and see the skill and the experience here, I realize I may have been better off if I had stayed in Maine and sheltered in place. Put on some sweatpants and watch a few episodes of The Joy of Painting. But alas, here I am. So There's somebody special I want to, excuse me, thank. That's Jackie Jones for beginning this. She's on the board and she's an artist member here. She also happens to be my fiance, but Jackie has worked tirelessly at developing this new demo lecture series, and I'm the one who's kicking it off. So very, very grateful for all the work. That's right. Yeah, you're right. I shouldn't have given you all the credit. There's the education committee on the board works so hard. So forgive me for anybody I don't mention. That's tricky territory. So anyway, I'm very, very grateful to be here, and very appreciative of all of the effort that's gone into beginning this series. Everybody on the board, and the support. There's Harley, the president of the thing. He's at the helm, and all the members of the thing. It's just great. It's wonderful to be a part of it. So let's get into painting the seascape. And because the format is truncated, I would prefer a dialogue over a monologue, but for efficiency's sake, I think I'll probably ask you to cluster questions and comments, and I'll stop every 20 minutes or so, and please share anything. And it's not just questions, criticisms, redirection. There's a lot of professional skill and talent in this room, a lot of knowledge. And I love the fact that it's a mixed audience. There's enthusiasts, there are collectors, and there are painters who are not professional, and there are professionals. So that whole range, I'll do my best to offer a narrative that includes everybody. But if I'm missing anything along the way, please don't be hesitant to say something to me. So here we go. I have all my brushes, I have all my stuff, now I got to do something with it. So this is called, the moving sea is the theme. We live on an earth that's made basically of basalt and carbon. There's some granite and some other stuff thrown in. But that sphere is covered 70% by water. And out of that 70%, 97% of it is ocean. So since there's so much water around, I figure it's probably a good idea to know something about it. And I began to study it when I was, observe it as a young man. And what the challenge that we have as painters, I'll back up 1 second. I don't consider my paintings to be decoration. That's often why people buy them. They purchase them and hang them on their wall to decorate their home. There's nothing wrong with that. But when I'm working on them, I'm interested in a human experience, something that has value to me. I was an illustrator before I went into fine art, and then I had a human narrative involved. I would get a storyline, and I would have to pictorially portray what was going on. So there's been a human component in my work. I wouldn't be interested in this at all if I was just making pretty pictures. And I've done it a few times in my career, and I've fallen flat on my face. So what I'm interested in is capturing a moment in the human condition and the human experience. And the challenge for painters is we have to take this moving world, multi-sensory moving world, and grab a piece of it and put it on a rectangle. So that's hard enough when you're working on a still life or you've got a subject matter that isn't moving. But when you've got a kinetic subject matter that wraps itself around the world and it's got energy, you've got to find a way to portray that within the limitations of a rectangle. So that's the challenge that I feel every time I go out and paint a seascape. So I've got a lousy photograph here. It's a surf running into Rockport. I figured I was interested in this anyway, but I thought it'd be appropriate for where we are. And seascapes can do any number of things, but primarily you'll see them either come forward toward you, or they'll be at an oblique angle one way or the other, or this one is running from the right to the left. And by the way, speak up if I'm in anybody's way. I can move around up here. I can even get down here. So depth of field is enormously important in any landscape painting. Seascape painting, you've got depth of field and you have movement. So because I want to capture the spirit, by the way, I got these screwy glasses because I had cataract surgery about 2 months ago and it didn't go so hot. So if I'm up here fidgeting with my eyes, that's why. So there's a motion here from the right to the left, and there's anatomy and energy in that C. And so what I'm going to do is I've pretty much matched these proportions from the photograph. And by the way, I mentioned I don't like to work from photographs. I don't, but under this format I have to. I think it's more informative than if I were to just be painting from a study of mine. I work from life directly. I work from studies and bring them to the studio. I work from memory and I work from imagination. That's primarily the way I work. But I'll use photographs in this particular case. So I've got this height matched here, and then I'm going to take, that's the focal point. This is not going to take long. This is just a thematic diagram. Very rough and crude, but it's the thought behind it that I want to share with you. I'm looking for these rhythms. These triangles right here are these foam patterns. Secondary. A wave builds and collapses. It builds and collapses. There's scalene triangles. So that's what's happening here. But what I want to do when I'm doing this, as my mind is getting used to the energy of this, I want my drawing to begin outside my picture frame. So I'm imagining this thing rising up and having its crescendo right here in this relationship. Now I'm going to send it off as it goes up onto the rocks on this end. So I'm not confined by the limitations of that rectangle. I'm going out and beyond it because I want that expansive energy. If I stay confined to this, I'm going to abbreviate the motion of the sea. So you have to think beyond the limitations of the picture plane. So that's what I'm doing here. And again, you know, I got an hour or so, and so I'm going to talk as fast as I can without sounding like an insurance commercial, but I want to get some of the principles across because you don't make a painting in an hour and 15 minutes. I'm going to take some brief measurements. If there were more time, I'd probably be doing a little bit more measuring, but for the sake of the criteria in this setting, that one. As soon as there's an element that's human-made, you can spot it. Everything else is organic, with the exception of a couple of little marks here. I'll throw out some painters' names for those of you who are familiar with within our field. Edward Seago, that guy was great at making shorthand. So as I'm beginning to see this rhythm, and I've had a lot of students who sit around like this and say, well, I wonder if I did that, or I wonder if I did that. And I said, well, stop cutting bait and fish. You're not going to find out until you make a mark. So wondering about it doesn't do anybody any good. Getting in there and beginning to make marks. So then what I do, as rough as that is, I'll take a measurement here. Again, these are the rocks that are moving in from this side. And if anything I'm doing doesn't make sense, or say, oh my God, that's a bunch of baloney.
Is your drawing proportional to your picture?
Under this time frame, under this format, yes. So this is what I do now. If I've got this expansive scene, that's an important role right there. And by the way, subject matter always reveals itself as you spend time with it. It's like getting to know a person. The more you spend time with it, the more you'll begin to recognize things. And somebody who you think is really terrific at the beginning. All right, so here's the first thing I'm going to do. I've drawn this expansive scene. I didn't bring a ruler, so I'm going to do this by eye. I'm going to now put these verticals down so I'll know what it is that I'm going to include in my picture. This is the way I work. So now I know roughly, but I can't get there unless I include this expansive energy. You put the totality of it in, and then you edit out. And that is why, that's when you'll successfully dedicate yourself to a rectangle. If you think that there's no water, no rocks here and no water there, you'll probably overly articulate or force, or contrive is the word I'm looking for. You'll contrive a solution. You got to think beyond the picture, especially with something. Jackie and I paint out west a lot, and you're looking, good God, you know, miles and miles and miles and miles, and if you don't realize that you're looking in segments, and each of those segments belongs in the totality of the Great West, and then you pick something. You can't pick it all, and you can't shove it all in. So that's the simple diagram there. Did any of that make sense? Now, don't just say that. So a lot of painters, a lot of this is very, very, very subjective. A lot of painters like to take a big old brush and just start moving it around and sculpting with big masses of paint and push. I'm not that painterly. I'm a little bit more, I've got more of a system, I think. And I think it probably comes because of my being an illustrator. I didn't have the option of blowing it, so, excuse me, I thought I'm missing one color that I got to put out here. And by the way, I need somebody in this fine staff to give me time checks so we don't go crazy.
What colors are in your palette?
They are, and this has been pretty consistent throughout my career, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, viridian, green earth, cad yellow light or lemon, cad yellow medium, yellow ochre, raw sienna, cad red light, cad red medium, alizarin crimson, burnt sienna. That's not burnt sienna. That's what nerves will do to you. I put the wrong one out. Well, we'll worry about that later. Burnt umber, and this is a weird color called greenish umber. But I see it in the landscape and the sea, in the sea along the shore all the time. Well, I'm not going to go fiddling for that. If I have to correct that later, I will. Unless there's some right here, and then I'll put it out. Yep, there it is. I put out Indian red for some reason. It's the cataracts. So yeah, time checks all the way along would be very helpful if someone...
It's been just over 20 minutes if you want to take a pause and see if anyone...
Sure. Anything? Anybody?
I have a question on starting your painting on the left there.
Yeah.
I'm in a painting group, and it's very much emphasized to put the grid down first, then put in the subject.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you're doing it the opposite way.
You're exactly right. But I employ the grid method all the time. For different criteria, I will use the grid method to make sure I get the height and the width relationships correct.
Okay.
In this particular case, I'm not without a grid. The grid is because, again, the time frame. When I'm looking at this, I'm seeing a grid. I just didn't happen to draw it down there. But every one of my measurements is this right over that foam? How far from there, from this, is the next object? So there's an implied grid in what I did. So there's two ways of doing it. You can compose and draw from the inside out, which is what I did. Or you can compose from the outside in, which is you make those parameters first and then you make the thing fit.
Right.
I have worked diligently to get my students to do it, and good God, it's like slamming my head against the wall. But I'm glad you have the discipline, and don't give it up. They're both valuable. When there's energy and movement in a subject, I recommend this, because you get a greater feeling of the totality of it, and then you make your selection. But you can certainly do it the way you do. And anybody else?
Maybe this is obvious to everyone, but I'm just going to share something I stumbled on. I don't paint enough to have the instant eye that you have.
Mm-hmm.
What I discovered was I have maybe an 8x10 frame that was empty, or I'd use pieces of paper around my image because I would paint all over, and then to get the view I wanted, I'd move the frame around.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, it just was a good aid for me.
Yep, that's just another variation on the selection process. Yep.
The values when you're painting, when you're planning your painting, do you take into consideration
before you start painting?
Always. But again, because of the limited format we have here, I am all over my students, and I do it all the time. Black and white thumbnails, all the time. There's that old adage, I'll probably butcher it, somebody here knows it. Values do all the work and color gets all the credit. And it's true. That's where the structure is. It's in the values. So, a lot of this is going to be by eye. I'm actually not nervous, but my hand always shakes when I'm in front of an audience when I start. Every single time. I'm going to move around as much as I can out of consideration for the size of the crowd and the fact that some of you got to look. By the way, this is my best side, so. And I'm glad I scanned the audience. I didn't see any enemies, which is good, since my back's going to be to you most of the time. Although I've come up against it with that guy in the hat over there a few times, and I've backed down every single time. Yeah. What's that?
You asked if you understood the dialogue they presented. I said, vaguely.
I do all my drawing with a brush. I'm using liquid. You could certainly use any medium. Those are sort of the incidentals. And all I'm doing is trying to pick up contours and markers, if you will, for the location of objects. What is that thing about public speaking? Is it the thing that people are most afraid of? I can trump it. Public painting is worse.
Do you always prep your canvas that way with the...
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, what I do is I try to find what I call sympathetic colors to the subject. The worst thing in the world is a white canvas. Just get it out of the way. Even that's the first emotional step toward having a relationship with the picture. When I'm in the field, I go with a white canvas, but when I get there, I tone it according to what I see. So thanks for asking that. I got to get a little more fluidity on here. Our craft really is nothing more than in service to our motive, as I was saying about the human condition. Paintings are two-dimensional objects, which in our school, in our collective school, not in other forms of art, not objective, non-representational art, but in our world. One of my definitions of a painting is a two-dimensional object that hosts a three-dimensional illusion. So you are building the thing. You're building it like you're building a chair. And you build it according to the motive you have, be it emotional or intellectual or a combination of those two things. No matter how good your craft is, the best thing it can be is a delivery system. And if you've got a great delivery system and nothing to say, who cares? But if you've got a great message but no delivery system, you're going to fail. So you have to have craft that's appropriate to your intention. And you don't have to be a brilliant draftsperson. It's just like songwriting. It's that creative process. But there has to be ultimately purpose behind what you're doing. We all love the how of painting. How do I do this and how do I do that? But ultimately you're going to reach a point when you say, okay, well, I know how to draw an apple and paint a copper pot. Why am I doing it? So that's the essence of it. I'm a quick learner. It only took me 55 years to begin to figure that out. I change my underpainting. This seems tedious at first, but with a little luck, it's going to speed up and things will begin to coalesce here in a little while. This is the most nerve-wracking part of doing this. It's hard when you're in your crummy clothes alone in a studio and then you go and do this. This brush isn't being particularly cooperative. It may have to go into a timeout pretty soon. Something ominous about that church bell going off while I'm... Yeah, this brush is not doing it. So, I was just saying to someone a little while ago, if the brushes aren't working, I don't keep them in my hand. They go out the door. That's the one I want. I carry way too many brushes, but I know the right one's in there somewhere, so. All right, now we're going to make some big marks. And there's a light source here. It's a milky one. I'm not thinking about that yet. I'm thinking about the building of the picture. This is in the two-dimensional realm, height and width, spatial allocation, spatial relationships, the spirit, the mood, the depth, all that's to come. Come back next week at this time and I'll... But this linear armature is an important component for me. Now, one thing I practice and I try to teach to my groups is observation and invention. Now, that's one of the reasons I like using lousy photographs, because I don't become dependent upon the photo. If I am using a photograph, I'm not dependent upon it. And photographs can make one lazy. And if you begin to think that, well, I'm imitating a photograph, well, that's exactly what you're doing. You're not painting. You're not creating. You're replicating. So there's creation and there's recreation. We are recreating to some degree because we're taking the real world and putting it into the painted world. So we have that. But one thing you don't want to do is to be removed one step further and think that the ultimate goal is to make your picture look like a photograph. And every one of us who's been out there, when we've succeeded and had something that has some believability to it, some visual veracity to it, people say that looks just like a photograph. And so what are you going to say now? I'm ugly too? They don't understand the fact that that's not what we're interested in doing. Not to make fun of anyone. So all of this riprap, that's of no use in this painting. Some indications of some of it will potentially work okay, but all that is a barrier, just an obstacle to getting into the scene. And I want this dynamic movement in here. There's an implied triangle in here, which can work nicely.
Are you particular about the color you're drawing with?
I'm not. Yeah, I am. Yep, I'm trying to have it be in accord with the subject itself, with the nature of the subject. I try to be as responsive and reactive to my subject as I can possibly be. All right, now there's no more need for any more drawing than this, especially given the time, but since there is lessons in this, I suppose, don't be lazy about the way you interpret a sky. Use the sky. A painting is a democratic surface. Every inch is as important as the next, whether it's active or not. So think about what your purpose is. There is a good anchor here with these horizontals and then the radiation as it moves out. I think in this particular case, it's worth my while to keep that. This is subjective. You figure this stuff out in drawing. You could then advance it to imply that there's height in the sky. Begin to elevate it here. Just give any diagonal will move up, down, one way or another. But all of those decisions, there's nothing arbitrary in the making of the picture. So now I got some big painting to do. Yeah, I told you I leave my brushes on the ground so I can do this and keep my back stretched, and now I'm down on my knees.
Do you run around the easel sometimes?
So I don't have any white on my palette. That's one of the ways that I work. I build up my opaques later. I like the use of thin passages. And the question about value, I start with a deeper value. I like to build up toward my lights. I can tell from the time format that I'm in that it's gonna require me to be even more aggressive. But I've got a lot of painting friends who work in a variety of styles, and I drive a lot of them nuts because I guess they could say maybe cautious. I like to get control of a picture, and then it gives me the freedom to open it up. I just have great admiration for painters that just go in and I'm not name dropping, but maybe some of you know Kevin McPherson and his work. He's a good friend, and he's always making fun of me for the way I block in a painting. And it's remarkable to see him just take a big broom full of paint and squash it down there, and then he crafts and carves it. So I guess this is the neat thing about painting. We all have to dedicate ourselves to the architecture of picture making. Regardless of style, we're obligated to know what we're doing in that regard. All the components that we're all familiar with. I'll talk and paint at the same time. And that being space allocation, composition, design, linear structure, linear armature, value structure. All of that has to be the same for all of us, regardless of our style. Those are the building blocks of making a painting. Beyond that, how you get there is really up to your own personality and what you're comfortable with. And I do break out of my systems. When I was an illustrator, you don't have the opportunity to break out of your systems. You got a deadline bearing down on you. You either got to figure out how to do it, or you're going to blow the deadline. So I developed a predictable way to paint, and it actually worked well for me in the field. My studio work, my illustrator work, helped me enormously when I went back outside and started to paint again. Pretty soon, I think, Jackie, when does Joe McGurl come up?
In April? No, June sometime.
And I went back outside and started to paint in the mid-90s with Joe. And he was very seasoned at it. It was fun to see him. He looked like an old farmer. He just knew his outdoor craft, his system was so fluid, so efficient. And I was out there with a credenza and an end table, studio lighting, opaque projector. So again, these are all transparent passages. That underpainting is enormously helpful. I'm going to take some, I call them implied verticals. I don't like to stack things up and down on top of each other, but I like there to be some relationship just off. And again, when I'm talking about observation and invention, you observe so that you have an understanding of the nature of the subject and the visual components of the subject. And then you alter, enhance, embellish, eliminate. What is not in a painting is absolutely as important as what is in it. So it's that editing process going on, what I'm going to include and what I'm not. And so there'll be I'm tightening that relationship. I want some tension in there. But I do want an anchor of one kind or another. So this is all, I'm just going to invent some shapes down here. And I invite anybody who's got any contribution to make. My art education was lousy. I had a fabulous high school art teacher, and after that it went downhill. So, so I had one fabulous teacher, and a lot of people will say, well, you're self-taught, and I am only to a limited extent. The way I see it is, after I had one good art teacher, art school was a disaster. And what's that? No. But I still wasn't self-taught. From that point on, I had 1,000 teachers. They just weren't assigned to me. So there were every painting I'd ever seen, every gallery, every museum, any artist I met that inspired me. I pestered all of them. So, so no, I'm not self-taught. I was given information from a myriad of sources from a number of years. So I don't, I'm no Abe Lincoln reading in front of the fire, learning how to paint. I'm using sculptural marks. Now it's going to be for the main body of the water coming in. And now I can add some white to the thing because there's a lot of opacity in that. I like the use of transparencies and thicker impastos. It works beautifully, and especially in woodland scenes like that. I was just up in Vermont. Oh, I've got some pictures on the table there that I brought in for your viewing. When I was just up in, I did one of them, no, two of them of those were from Vermont this last trip. And I'm just amazed at when I go out and paint with my colleagues. Stapleton, I can't help but mention you. When I see your palette, I think, good God almighty. That's how much paint I used in the 1990s. But he controls it somehow. That's what's so exasperating. But then I look at the field studies of Frederick Church, and there's no paint in them at all. And they're absolutely elegant, beautiful portrayals of the topography and the landscape. So I guess it's whatever suits your temperament and suits your technique, but I'm always in admiration of the painters that really lay that paint on in enormous amounts. There's a fella out west named Walt Gonski. He's a real legend out there. And the van the camper he drives around in should be a super fun sight. All right, I got to mix up a bigger batch here. I'm using Viridian and Cad Red. And I'm moving my hand as fast as I can. Why do we do these things to ourselves? I could be watching Bob Ross put a fence in right now. A happy fence, happy tree, yep. Any yes or no question is welcome. What's that?
Do you like to teach?
Do I like to?
Teach.
I do. This is the most challenging. If I've got my hands on people for 3 days, then you can take a breath. I'll breathe later. But I do. I've had to teach myself to paint in some respects, a little contradiction to what I said earlier, but we all have to. You know, you all end up alone with your paints in your hands, so people have asked me a couple times, well, how is it difficult to teach? And for me, it's not. I just think out loud. So the stuff I'm saying to you, I'm just vocalizing. Without the profanity. There's a lot of... So I find that the green, this is, you know, we're gonna, as I say, we're gonna go from shop talk back and forth to the various criteria for why people are here. I'm gonna repeat how grateful I am that you are. And just talk about the fact of the color that I'm using, which I use Viridians and green earth and the reds a lot. So now I'm going to begin to do this topographically. I want to start to move the rhythm of the sea.
So as you're painting, Don, are you thinking about the depth of the water? Are you thinking about, as you're putting paint down, does that go through your mind, like the feel of the moisture of the water, for lack of better, you know, is that going through your head as you're doing that? As
Yeah.
you're painting?
I'm still in the two-dimensional range or requirement that I'm filling the shapes in, but in addition to the visual components that I'm portraying, I'm always thinking about the reality of it. There's some subject matters require more scientific knowledge, understanding of it. There's an atmosphere and a hydrosphere. I've studied hydrodynamics enough in books just to get an idea. I wanted to know why the water spins around the earth the way it was. It's the Coriolis effect. It's from the magnetic poles, and water moves in the opposite direction. So then I know right here, I know a wave does this unless it gets interrupted by a sea bottom. And when that happens, the top of the water is moving faster than the bottom of the water because there's friction here and there's no friction here. So that equilateral triangle begins to change shape because it's being pushed from this side. And when you see a wave break over, it's because this force has taken this part of the triangle and shoved it that way. So now you've got, so the answer is yes, I'm thinking about all that stuff.
That way you're doing, while you're painting.
Yep. This ain't just a pretty face.
There's a brain in there.
Yeah, somewhere. My high school teachers are still looking for it to this day.
I have trouble visualizing the third dimension of that. The cross-section of the wave is fairly easy to see, but the third dimension, the length of the wave and how that interacts with the other forces is tough.
It is. And it takes a lot of study, and you're not going to get it. I'm not suggesting you've done this, but you're not going to get it from snapping a photo and saying, oh, that's what that's doing right now. You have to know what it was doing before, and you have to understand what it's about to do. And in that storyboard, in those sequences, you will begin to get a greater understanding. It's like we know a lot of painters, from Western painters, who paint horses really well. They've got to know exactly what that leg just did and what it's about to do. And boy, can you tell it when they don't. How am I doing on time?
7:18.
It's what?
It's 7:18.
7:18. That's not good news. All right, we'll keep moving as fast as we can. But you got to make a picture of a certain size. You know, it's a nice size audience, and I want you to be able to see to some degree what the heck it is I'm doing up here. So that's the reason. And this is only a 15 by 20, but it's also proof that this is no magic show. This stuff takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of consideration. It's one of the reasons I don't like those plein air shows. Because, you go out for 2.5 hours, 3 hours, and you bring a painting back, and somebody saw you painting it and said, "You're charging that much for a painting that took you 3 hours?" I said, "Yes, I am, and you don't have to buy it." I'm deepening the value now. Again, this is all topography. It's all movement. And one thing early on, and I challenge you to do this. We went to see the Sargent exhibition, the Sargent fashion exhibition. Is that disgusting that somebody can paint that well?
They're enormous. In fact, so huge.
Yeah,
They're enormous paintings.
one of those.
Yeah,
I would have dropped my brush and say, "I'm done.
that was incredible.
I'm going to take up golf." But the interesting thing about it that is the selective application of detail and symbols. Paintings are all symbols. That's all they are. We're making marks and symbols. It's a code. And so he had the sense to let these vast passages of those paintings just go. And if you isolated those passages, which I did, I said, "That's nothing but a Helen Frankenthaler painting." And just, it's loose. But then the turn of a button or a scarf or one little artifact, and that's what finished it off. And that's the way we see. As you and I are looking at each other, I'm looking at both your eyes, you're far enough away, and your nose, but even your chin is not in my cone of vision. We don't see someone in their entirety. That's why photorealism is not believable. It's a forced art. There's nothing wrong with it. People want to be photorealists. It's not for me to say to be one or not, but it's in the selection of what you decide to put in and where you decide to put it. I used to make paintings, exhausting effort. I wanted to make sure everything was in there, and it would be going along quite nicely, and then I would become obsessed with all the details. It's like catching a baby bird, and you're patting it, and you're patting it, and you're patting it until you kill it. Probably a bad metaphor. Letting the thing have a life of its own. I love the feeling of painting when we're not in complete control. We're in as much control as if you want to have the thing have its own spirit. And the sea needs to have its own spirit. So it's like rock climbing or something. You just clip in, you focus, you pay a lot of attention, and you hang on to the experience. And you use all your skill and all your craft to direct the work and where you want it to go. But at the same time, you have to have you have to be subjected to it to some degree.
So how do you think Sargent was subjected to those portraits? He really captured the expression of the people.
Yeah, he's not a good example because he's so much of a genius. But if you look at how closely articulated the faces were, that's just high craft, just an ability of observation that's beyond description. The ancillary parts of his pictures were the things that fascinated me more, just to see what he chose not to do and how he gave the thing space. There's a beautiful relationship in here. You can't really see it in that lousy photo, but I'm inventing it to some degree, where there's beautiful soft lavender. And I learned to paint with white by looking at Frank Benson paintings in those dresses on his daughters. And when I saw pink and lime green and God knows what else he would put in there. And William Lawn Palmer, that guy's pretty good with white.
Do you use zinc white at all?
I do. I use it in my big studio seascapes.
Say again, please.
I use it in my large studio seascapes because of its translucent quality and it's got a stringiness to it.
Yeah.
It's great for scumbling and dragging across. I wouldn't use it here because it doesn't make enough of an impact.
Yeah. Several hits of it, right?
Yep. Most of what I know about painting is just from having done it a lot and experimenting. Of course, I've got Ralph Mayer's book. Anybody who's ever, I have the same Ralph Mayer book that I had when I was in art school. So what I'm doing painting now, besides frantically, is trying to build this relationship of these tracings of foam.
What colors are you using?
I'm using cad red medium and cobalt blue and white. And when you begin to get into the subtlety of certain colors, that's when color relativity really takes off. That's when it becomes so important. This color really wouldn't mean nearly as much if it weren't against this soft green. And I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, I got to move this as fast as I possibly can. But what I can do is articulate my artistic intentions while I'm doing it. And continue to build in the large. I do a lot of scanning, looking around. Painting is an exploration. And whenever you're exploring anything, you need clues. So on my paintings, I try to assess them and say, okay, what's the next thing that's going to give me the most information? I'm not going to get fiddling around with doing all kinds of little details on that shoreline. I need some bigger statements here. Even the introduction of blue up here. And I like, I'm pursuing the value of the sky being darker than anything here, because what that will do is it'll collect those two masses and it'll let this one stand out. That's in the value relationship category. If you've got 5 values, you can count them 1, 3, and 5. Those are evenly distributed. The painting becomes more interested if you collect 1 and 2 and have 5, or if you collect 4 and 5 and have 1. So there's an outlier. You see that used all the time in Western landscape painting. It's much more interesting to, well, if you hear ding, 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 it's kind of boring. If you hear ding, 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 it's music. Or ding, 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 the same 3 sounds, it's just where you collect them. And values do that in pictures all the time. Now for my second song. I'm going to put a warm tone up in the sky just as fast as I possibly can. This is good for you. It's like running sprints. That's much too pink, but again, I got a lot of fish to fry up here. Nope. That was unfortunate. I don't know where that came from. Now, see, if I was in the studio by myself, that would have been accompanied by that's what.
You haven't mentioned temperature much.
I haven't mentioned it, but it's critically important. It does so many things besides setting a mood. It turns a form. You can change the shape of something by changing the temperature in the passages and not change the value at all. Again, William Lant Palmer, his winterscapes. My gosh, what that guy could do with just moving a temperature here and there. And an awful lot of people don't understand what that means. For those of you who aren't painters, it's just cool temperatures, cool colors live in this area, blues and greens, and warm temperatures live over here. Live, I do sound like Bob Ross, Jesus. Whoop. That's too much liquid, but We'll leave it there for now. And it's worth studying. I know prismatic palette, that's been studied with Frank Dumond, and I tried a lot of that stuff a little bit to some degree. I know Ray has. And I studied Munsell and Barron. I threw it all aside. I don't have the patience for it. I don't want a system. I want my understanding of painting to be empirical. I want it to be what I've seen and what I've learned from having the tools in my hand. All right, I'm going to go in for the big abstract here pretty quick. I got one bit of work to do in the foreground. I mean, in the foreground. That's not the foreground. Depth of field, so important for those of you who want to paint outside or paint from the natural landscape. I'm just going to put a representational pattern of, I want to get a good rich color back there. Dashes and dots. The British painters are wonderful at this. They don't overly articulate it. They see things in these Morse code kind of marks. If anybody wants to take a break and go get something to eat, that's fine with me. Powers that be, anybody want a break, or is everybody okay? Yeah. All right. No, I'm okay. Thank you. Yeah, what's that?
Where's your light source?
It's very soft, and it's from here down. It's a very benign source. It's a milky light. If I had, well, not if, when, because I'm going to do it. Probably not in this session because there's simply not enough time to do it. But what I will do is play some of this up a little bit more exaggeratedly, just to give a little bit more form. But for the most part, it's a very, very soft light coming from the upper left. And I can see where you wouldn't be able to discern that because I haven't emphasized it at all. But you bring up a very good point because that should be considered. Now, the one beautiful thing about an overcast day is that we have a big umbrella, a big filter over us. So the light has no geometry to it. You don't get an angular light. As soon as it hits that cloud bank, all of the protons in the light disperse and diffuse, and it's just a soft snowfall of light. And that's why it's so nice to be able to paint outside on those kind of days, because you've got a 5 or 6 hour window. When there's more severe, more clear, defined light, then you've got outside, you've got about 2 fingers of time. I've figured out if the sun is over my middle finger, I've got till it hits my forefinger. That's about as much latitude as I've got out there on a strongly lit day. After that, you're just making it up, which is okay too. I finish paintings outside all the time from memory, but I figured, okay, I've got the spirit of the scene, it's fresh in my mind. I'm going to work on this while I'm out here. But to chase the light any longer than that on a sharply lit day, you're going to end up with a fabrication, for lack of a better word. All right, crude, but at least some semblance of some landform back there. Start with the macro and go to the micro, and then I'm going to go back macro again when I start laying all these the big foam patterns in. Thanks for your patience watching me do this. Sure appreciate it. I think most painting videos are really boring. I shouldn't say that. I'm not crazy about, well, I don't watch mine. I've already had enough of me. But here's one of the philosophical things I want to share. Could you bring that soapbox out for me, please? I'd like to stand on it. In this world that we live in, especially with technology wrapped around us and everything moving so quickly, I love the fact that paintings are the antithesis of that. Paintings help us catch our breath. When you hear that phrase, he or she really captured that. I love that word. It's captured in a frame. And we can catch our breath for a second and look at it. I looked it up scientifically. We see over 1 million images a day just by having our eyes open. Boy, what a blessing it is that paintings can just stop it for a while. So we've got a role here on this earth. This is all patterning now. I went from the larger shapes and I'm working my way as quickly as I possibly can.
So talk a little bit about the pattern and rhythm.
Yep, it's the flow of the sea where it builds, it rides up, it's suspended for a moment, it breaks, then in the secondary, it'll rise up again, it'll fall back again. It's a back and forth rhythm, and what I'm trying to do is plot and capture all of those shapes and turns in whatever position it happens to be in terms of the modulation of the way the sea is moving. And so, because our brushes are descriptive tools, I want to use that brush in the appropriate direction to try to capture that topography. If you want to see somebody that's good at it, look at that guy. Wall was great at it. That's nice. They surround me with these genius painters. Dirty, dirty trick. I didn't see it coming. Carl Rungis out west. Fabulous. Highly stylized, but he was dedicated to the bigness of the land and the movement. It wasn't all about it was about the aesthetic, but it was about the aesthetic based upon his understanding of the nature of the subject.
Are you familiar with E. John Robinson?
I learned so much about painting from him when I was a teenager. I bought all his books. He was terrific.
Yeah.
I owe him a debt of gratitude. He was one of my 1,000 teachers, you know.
All about the energy of the sea.
That's it. Yep. So I'm looking for these intermediate passages. I'm still in that red and green family. Here in New England, you know, I keep this full palette. There are many times when I go out with a very limited palette, and also a bias palette. I shift it to one side or another. That's where the mood is. Some of my favorite painters, well, one of my top 2 or 3 is Burge Harrison. I don't paint anything like him, but I certainly do admire the brilliant, atmospheric, understanding first and then departure second of his portrayal of his subject matter. And it was all with these very, very, very subjected color choices, closing values down. All right, I'm going to strike some. So I think it's important. And by the way, I hope there's some value to this to those of you who don't paint but simply collect, and maybe give you a little bit more information about what this is all about the next time you go into a museum. What I'm interested in sharing is some principles of painting, not necessarily how I do it. Now, speaking of temperature, I can tell that's way too cool. I got to warm that up dramatically.
I was told that the farther back it goes, the cooler it gets.
Aha! Who was it that said that? That's true under some circumstances. And every landscape painting book will say that. But it's not true all the time. Atmospheric or aerial perspective, this is the one thing you can count on. It doesn't always get cooler. That's a formulaic solution that has not been observed thoroughly. If you go into the mountains or you go to the California coast and look up the coastline, the warmest thing you'll see will be the farthest thing away. So you have to get out there and witness it. It all depends on light refraction and the angle of the sun to the earth. So if you rely on that one scenario, it's a common scenario, but it's not nearly adequate. So that's the trouble with some, and I didn't mean to pounce on you. I didn't mean any disrespect there.
My teacher said, warmer up front, cooler in the back. Further distance, the cooler it gets.
Yep. I mean no disrespect to your teacher, but that's one scenario, but it's only one. There are many others that you'll see. I can't believe how many times I've been out in the field and said, my God, that thing, especially out west. Geography has everything to do with it. As I've traveled around, and if I could make up the color of a breaking wave and put it in a tube, I would, but I can't. And I don't want to, actually, because I'm contradicting myself. Because depending upon whether I'm on the coast of Maine or California or down in the Panhandle, everywhere you go, it has a different makeup. So challenge yourself when you're outside next time. If you're making paintings up, which I do, you know, it's okay to rely on some of those things because they're believable. But in the complete understanding of landscape painting and seascape painting, there's more to it than that. I paint my pictures backwards. I'm building up to putting the whites in here. I do it all the time. I kind of hold back. I'm putting some dark marks in here. They've just got to be very simple. Indications of what's going on in this foliage. Again, this is like a musical it's like sheet music. Where do you want the punctuations? Where do you want it to flow? That's much cooler, so I'm going to portray that a little bit, and then I'm going to go in and build these big whites in here and see if I can put some drama in this, some graphic drama.
742.
Okay. Plenty of time. I know darn well this is not the conclusion of a painting. It's the lay-in of a painting, and I hope some sound principles so that you can see the painting being built. Clearly, it's nerve-wracking to be up here doing this, but it's exciting at the same time. I've taught a lot of workshops, a lot. And the workshops that my students enjoyed the most were the ones when I blew the demos. Painting made more sense to them when they saw the challenge, how hard it can be. And by painting quickly like this, I know I mentioned wind sprints. It is a good calisthenic. It sharpens your skills. You haven't got time to fiddle around with it. And like anything else, it's the repetitious discipline that you have to put into the picture. put into your work, rather. Here, this is a small bristle. I can play with it a little bit. A couple of indications. Clear it off and get a big batch of various whites and go in here and start tracing. And at least have the first go around, if you will. I use a quick dry white quite a bit, especially in the field. In the studio, if I've got a big painting going, I just finished a 4 by 5 foot marine commission. That was a big picture. And I did not use quick dry white on that picture. I wanted the painting to stay open so I could work edges, and it had a bunch of schooners in it, so toward the final conclusion, once I knew it was dry, I came in with a white that had a faster drying time. All right, so this is just titanium. I'm just touching it a little bit with yellow ochre and cad red light. I'm going to test it. I do value and color checks like that all the time. I'm actually pleased to see how high that is. That means I've got a lot of range to build up lights. I can come way down, more like that. You know if you've gone too far one way or another. If you can't get something light enough, the worst thing to do is to keep trying to make it lighter. You go in the opposite direction. If your painting seems too yellow, you don't put more, you're not getting the glow you want. You don't put more yellow in, you put purple in. You just go to the opposite. Yep. It's George Costanza thinking. I'm just glancing at my subject matter because what I really have to stay devoted to is energy and the rhythm. Mark making is extremely important. I don't even think about edges for a lot of my painting. I go back and deal with them later. I'll do a little bit of that. I know I'll have some time to do that, not a lot, but I'll have some time anyway to illustrate the approach.
What are you mixing the white with?
I've got cad red light, yellow ochre, and cobalt. So basically 3 primaries. And then you just I begin to let my arm flow with the, yep. And it doesn't matter if it's clumsy and awkward at first, as long as you've got the spirit of the movement. There's a lot of twisting and turning with the brush. I want this foam to ride up and fall. I also push and pull. There's a strong back toe right here.
You make use of filbers, right?
They're my workhorse.
Pardon?
They're my workhorse. That's the primary brush I use.
Yep.
Yeah, like I said, it's not magic. I remember those guys on TV where they have a giant canvas and rock music playing, and they'd spin it around and throw paint at it. And when it stopped, it was a portrait of John Lennon. Do you remember seeing them on those? I don't know how they did that stuff is pretty amazing.
Expressing yourself.
Yeah, they just they had a thing down. Anybody remember Captain Bob?
Yes.
I sat in front of that TV and watched him every Saturday morning, and he'd whistle and he had his pipe and
Yeah.
off to the fish shack, and he'd do it. Today we're going to draw a seagull, and then next week it would be a fishing boat. And
Yeah, yeah.
I said, my God, I was mesmerized by the way he did it. So fast forward to art school, and I'm on a trip on one of the commercial art classes we had, and we had to go to the Channel 5 studio. And there was Captain Bob's fishing shack. And the pads with the drawings on it, and all the things were drawn non-repro blue pencil already. The bastard was tracing.
Imagine that. You thought it was. Talking about magic.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Tooth Fairy, Easter Bunny, Santa, now this.
All right, boys and girls.
Yeah. It's like in that Christmas story when the kid gets his Ovaltine ring. Realizes it's a crummy commercial.
Wow. That's unbelievable.
That took a while to get over.
That's it. I'm taking this picture down.
Don, you know you already got it, right?
I'm not unhappy with
I mean, the movement is
the fluidity of the thing.
it's exquisite.
Okay, good. It's just going to take a lot of paint applications. And if you know you've grabbed it, then you can breathe and say, okay, now all I need is time and attention. But you have to stay dedicated to the energy in the scene.
It's beautiful.
Thanks, Ray. I'm going to cross the street and look at it from there and see. Wet and wet works really well when you're painting in seascapes.
It's just amazing. Talk about magic tricks.
Calligraphic.
So it's extremely important to know the movement of the water.
That's the key. I mean, I'm not painting this like this.
No.
I'm painting from the shoulder, and I'm using the side of the brush, and this is the directive. There has to be a connection between everything. First off, our perceptions have to be working well. You got to work on your skills of observation, and then your consciousness of intention, and through the heart, through the brain, out the neck and the shoulder. Hopefully, ends up on the fingertips, and then they give us this wooden stick. And so if I've got the spirit in it first, that's what's important.
So I'm guessing it's the same as knowing the anatomy of the body when you're doing figure painting.
Oh, that's precisely what it is. I don't do figure drawing much at all anymore. I did it all the time as an illustrator. But you know, you go around the Salmagundi Club, and my God, there's some pretty brilliant painters around there. Where am I? 10 of or so, or something like that?
7:53.
What's that again?
It is 7:53.
Oh, okay, good.
We didn't have a set end time, so you're good.
I'll just do as much as I can in an hour and 20 or whatever it's been.
We could have a sleepover.
If you can imbue the picture with that spirit in the first place, it's for one thing, it's exciting, and then you get excited by going back to it. Jackie and I have been sharing a studio, and you can tell immediately with your painting partner when they're hitting on something and the enthusiasm kicks in. You walk in the studio and see what Jackie's been doing. Oh, wow, you're grabbing this one. It's a fun feeling. It's not so fun when you boot it, but that's part of it too. That's what I tell when I have a workshop. I said, do not expect to take out a canvas and make a painting every time you go out. That's foolishness. That's not the way it works. That it's all the process, and through that process, through the cumulative attention and effort and exercise of craft, paintings will emerge. But there's going to be a stack this high. It's all in the painting hours and the discernment of what it is you're after. It's a little foolhardy to think that you're going to paint really well all of the time. You're not being fair to yourself. And a lot of the plein air events do that. And they sell, with all due respect, I do the plein air convention and that kind of stuff. I try to carry a message that's authentic. But that idea that paintings get produced in very consistently in a very brief format it's not true. You do any reading in art history at all, and all the masters didn't become masters because everything they did was great. They just knew it when they didn't.
You didn't see all the stuff on the floor.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I want to put a little punctuation mark in the back. Yeah, I would have loved to advance this painting more than I could, but it's a lay-in. That brush is too big. That's what the other thing that used to drive me crazy with my painting teachers. Your brush is too small. Well, I'm doing a delicate area. I don't want a big brush. Now that might be a little strong, but that's okay. I'm all right with that. When you have an understanding of what the accuracy of the subject, you can then have the artistic freedom to go and adjust according to you, where you want to direct that person, what you want them to see in the composition. You are the one who's the conductor. So you can emphasize some things and de-emphasize others. We'll see if this guy works. Pretty interesting with painters in this room that have so much experience, and we still wonder, gee, am I going to do this right? I'm glad I'm not a doctor. the turning of that brush is something I've spent a lot of time on. This intersection right here is quite important. One of the tension points in the picture. And as systematic as I am, that thought went off. We'll let that one go. It's going to make a circle back to the brain station here. That damn bell again. Oh, I have a panic attack every time I hear it now. We're running out of our church. So transparent shadows on the first lane, and now I'm putting some opaque color on top of those rocks to begin to suggest the form. And every painting has major themes and sub-themes, major themes and then sub-themes within them. I actually go over my paintings in the studio with a viewfinder and I examine every passage. Because, yep, I want paintings within the painting. And is there anything that hasn't been considered? Not necessarily painted. There are some things that need to be left alone, but they at least need to be considered. Examine the thing, my criteria, that's that old question that drives us all nuts. How do you know when the painting's done? And I actually have an answer for it. Have I said what I intended to say in the picture? And the second question is, does the painting live up to my intended aesthetic? So some paintings can live up, they fill the first category. Yeah, that's the feeling and the mood I wanted. But if the aesthetic isn't there, the picture's not done. If the brushwork is weak, if there's poor edge work, if there's any component in my personal aesthetic, and we all have a different one. A lot of us coincide, but so that's where I go with that. And then after that, I just try to leave it alone. Now there's a magic brush in here somewhere, and I'm going to tap it 3 times, and you close your eyes, and the picture will be done. Nah, I'm not seeing it.
Boy, that's quite an accomplishment in an hour and a half.
Well, thanks. It didn't go backwards, so that's good. I know I have that brush here. Aha, here it is. And I'll push it another 5 minutes. I want to see a little bit more out of this myself. I don't overplay. I don't like fan brushes. They're too clever for me. But I will manipulate edges. They're particularly effective in seascape painting because moving sea turns into foam, and then it turns into mist. Then it turns into vapor. And then it gets suspended for a moment because the velocity of the molecules stops, and then gravity takes over, and the vapor turns back into foam, mist and then foam, and it turns back into fluid and washes out to sea again. And the only stuff that goes away is what was taken away by evaporation. So it's magic right in front of your eyes. So next time you're there, look over the rim of that umbrella drink you got in your hands and look at the sea.
Do that. With or without the cherry?
Yeah. Oh no, you got to have the cherry. That's your signature. So this unifies and puts movement in mist, but again, it's effective, but I don't like to be too clever with it. I just like it to contribute to the overall movement of the picture. Now I'm going to go back and introduce some more of that green. It's a back and forth process as these pictures get carved and developed. What's that?
It has a lot of movement.
Good. Well, that's the key. You have to put the spirit in it first. and then make sure, and that's when I said, then you're the custodian to it. Make sure you don't smother it with obsessive ideas about, oh, I have to finish this off and I have to finish that off. Because the more of that refinement, like breaking a horse, you know, not that I've ever broken one. I broke my rocking horse when I was a kid. You want to be the steward of that, of the energy in that picture, and that takes discernment. And this, for you painters, if you're as busy at the end of a painting as you are at the beginning, you're probably wrecking it. So, the pace of your application should diminish as you go, and your discernment, the decisions that you're making, are in service to what you've created. So if you go in and you're still chomping away at the thing, you're not really using the potential artistic intuition and intellect. And I'll do a painting in the field or something, and then I'll take it into the, you know, it looks like it's almost done. I'll spend a day and a half or 2 days with my arms crossed looking at it, and when I find out then I'll know the mark to make. But I just don't keep making marks. Oh, that's mumbling. You're just chattering away at the thing. Blathering is a good word for it. You don't want to blather on your paintings. Thanks a lot. See you later. No. I'll poke at it a little bit more, but there's wine to drink, shrimp to have.
Not only is there plenty of food and drink, but there is an array of Don's paintings, beautiful paintings for sale, right at the table
Yeah,
here.
that's true. I forget about the business part of this. Thank you all very, very, very much. No, we can keep talking. There's no need to shut up. Yeah.